Morning, everybody. Day 43. Cool. So again, you cannot think of this as the end, only the beginning. We are approaching the starting point, or you are approaching your own starting point. Cool. So we're going to continue with this story, a very true and intriguing story of how we got these brains in our skulls. We're going to actually shift metaphors for the final few days. Another popular metaphor in sort of meditative based therapy is the mountain in the swamp. And so usually this metaphor is explaining the sort of like cyclical nature of being in the swamps of like negative emotional space and then finding your way to the mountain. And it's used to normalize the fact that no matter what we do, how organized our routines are, how beautiful our lives are, how compassionate and sort of focused our minds are, we will inevitably and always find ourselves in some sort of swamp. And the perpetual journey of making your way back to the mountain is just sort of an aspect of life. And if you can vibe with that and appreciate that, and again, often metaphors help create a perspective that normalize things like this, that inevitable becomes manageable. So mountain in the swamp. But I want to sort of remix this metaphor that the mountain in the swamp journey is really a journey that has been going on for almost 500 million years, a little more than 500 million years. And it is the journey from unconsciousness, literally before we had brains and nervous systems, or organisms had brains and nervous systems, to now where we are consciously manipulating our brains and nervous systems to better support our experience of reality. We are literally building the mountain and achieving the summit through meditation. So here we go. This is the story of the brain again. So Michio Kaku is a physicist. He has an interesting little statement about intelligence. Intelligence is not necessary. Our intelligence is not necessary to survive. In fact, maybe it's detrimental. We've only been around for 100,000 years, and we have created such dramatic change in our ecosystems that the planet might just wipe us out before 200,000 years. Versus other animals that did not have our intelligence, like alligators, who've been around for millions of years. So intelligence is not necessary, and it begs the question, well, how did we become so intelligent? Where did this come from? Why does it exist? And so back to the little flatworms and the evolution of the nervous system and the brain. The first organisms that had the nerve structures were radial, right? So circular, and the nerve structure was fairly simple. But as they evolved into bilateral forms, meaning we are symmetrical from left to right. And what's important about this is that eventually what that led to is a top and a bottom. And so where the radial sort of symmetry evenly dispersed the nerve networks, bilateral symmetry encouraged nerve networks, or the ganglia, the proto-brain, to cluster into specific locations, to cluster at the top, which eventually would become the head. So this is going on. Bilateral organisms are evolving, moving from water to land. And this takes hundreds of millions of years. And so we're going to jump this evolutionary chapter and go to about 6 to 7 million years ago, Africa, where a chimp-like creature, a common ancestor to us, is forced out of its environment. There's a great rift. The Great Rift Valley of Africa is on the eastern side of Africa. It's where two tectonic plates are separating, and in that the land is sinking. On the east side, the land is elevating, and it's changing. The force is becoming drier and drier and drier over millennia. And so over those millennia, the apex primate is being forced to move further and further into the valley, further and further away from its natural habitat, and into the plains where it is exposed. It is no longer a peak predator. And so this forces this primate to adapt. It forces this primate to interact with more powerful predators, and it forces them, most importantly of all, to communicate with each other in new ways to survive. And so environmental shift forces evolution. Very interesting because the meditation sort of culture is in an upswing because our environment is changing from, you might say, environmental to technological, and we're doing that. We're in our own migration, forcing new behaviors and new lifestyles, i.e. meditation. Anyways, so these creatures are forced to think differently. Evolution is a natural process, so all organisms are evolving, and they're learning how to communicate and organize and strategize and ambush the predators, the threats, and the prey. The next necessary step is bipedalism. So most primates are sort of bipedal. They can stand upright for a little bit of time, but it's uncomfortable. Then they have to go back down to all fours or rest in the trees. But because these primates that moved into the plains were forced to, or else they would die out, they learned to stand upright, to see over the tall grasses, to get a higher vantage point, and to see crouching felines and crouching sort of dogs and canines. And so bipedalism was a necessary factor to support us in evolving our intelligence. This freed our hands, and again, it allowed us to make games and play puzzles and build things, which again is facilitating thought. The next very important step is about 2 million years ago. It is the advent of fire. And this is probably the most important step in the evolution of our minds. Because we harness fire, we could cook our foods, we could pre-digest meat, pre-digest vegetables, break down the toxins in vegetables. And as we consumed more and more food, and it took less and less energy for our bodies to digest, all of that nutrition and all of that energy was resourced into supporting the brain. And so the brain goes through this enormous shift. It doubles in size in no time at all. It goes through gyrification where it starts to fold into itself and created the sort of the symbolic curvature and folds of the human brain. And it grew and grew and grew because of essentially fire and the nutrition we were consuming and the energy we were saving. And so that's about that. That is how, on an environmental evolutionary way, we achieved these brains of ours. Just a side note on intelligence. It's not the size of your brain that matters. It's not the complexity of the folds. What really matters is the brain to body size ratio. So that's just a side note. And that's it. And so the reason I'm sharing this is because we are interacting with this organ in a brand new way. And what we are essentially doing is we are learning to turn it off. For 500 million years, it has been running on. For 2 million years, it has been going, hyperspeed. And we've never learned how to turn it off. And now, about 2,000 to 5,000 years ago, some people in the Indus Valley civilization, maybe other cultures, but the Indus Valley civilization, India, really got into this about 5,000 years ago, learned to turn it off. And that's what's happening. You're learning to turn off this extraordinary tool that has helped us survive and evolve. And that is the next step forward. And it's very sort of poetic, and it matches the biology and the narrative of how this organ evolved. It matches the philosophy of all meditative lineages. It's off. It's nothingness. What you're experiencing is not something. It's the absence of everything. And that's really, really cool. So that's the story of your brain. We are learning to turn it off. From the swamp to the mountain, there's a lot of different ways to think about that. But I think today what will be nice is to appreciate your ancestry, to appreciate that little flatworm, to appreciate the primates that came out of the forest, 6-7 million years ago, to appreciate the proto-humans that were communicating and using fire for the first time in prehistoric Africa, and then to feel yourself right now at the tail end of their effort, turning off this technology for the first time. Beautiful. Okay, cool. So do what you do, right? Use the fire stick of the metaphor, swamp to mountain, when you must. But more than anything, spend your time with your thoughts diffused and exist with the present moment in a way that maybe humans haven't existed with the present moment for millions of years. Alrighty. Comfortable seated position. So a little guidance at the beginning. Just notice, assuming your posture and closing your eyes immediately makes you more mindful now. And so what I say should hit you harder. It should land more deeply. From radial symmetry to bilateral symmetry. This pushed the nerve networks into specific locations, into clusters called ganglia. And so your bilateral symmetry is why you have a brain at the top of your body. Six to 7 million years ago, our ancestors were forced out of their environment into a new environment that demanded a change in behavior, which generated a change in physiology. As the environment changes, we must change. And that is what you're doing right now. From the cities to the openness of a controlled mind. The more than likely accidental advent of fire as technology allowed us to consume nutrition at no cost. And that random circumstance that created unnecessary intelligence afforded us deep thought. And so in this random Promethean moment where man is given fire, they are also given mind. And for 2 million years, that fire has been growing. And now within you, through meditation and mindfulness, you are scaling the mountain and learning to put the fire out. And so just listen to one little thing. Enter the now. When the mind wanders, think of swamps, think of mountains. Let that bring you back. The fire isn't completely extinguished. The mind is still thinking. But it is controlled through non-judgment, through presence, through letting go, through trust. The mind becomes another circumstance of now, like the wind, like the smell of incense. This is the mountain. And from the mountain, even the swamp is beautiful. I want you to feel that what you're doing right now is the future. This is a willed evolutionary step. Alan Watts said, "We do not come into life, we come out of life as leaves from a tree." The next expression comes from within us. And no one knows where it goes. The first primate to eat cooked meat. The first ancestor to utter a sound that was connected to an idea. And now we have language. And now we have cuisine. Our personal willingness to defuse our thoughts is such an act. It is an adaptation to a new world. And again, you are among the few that are adapting to it. And so feel that you are already on the mountain. Your presence through this challenge proves it. With the breath in, open your eyes. Beautiful. We all want to be part of something. We all want to be, a part of movements. It creates a really powerful and expansive sense of social bondedness, which is important to our species. And I think this addition to our concept of meditation can feed that in a really powerful way. So it's just yet another sort of sweetness that might inspire you to keep practicing if you keep it in your head.